Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into, well, a really fascinating and honestly often misunderstood period.
Hmm.
Southern society in the early American Republic. We're talking specifically about those pivotal years between 1800 and 1848.
Right.
We've gathered quite a stack of articles, research, notes. And our mission really is to cut through the complexity, give you a kind of shortcut to understanding a society that was in many ways quite an enigma.
Hmm.
We're going to try and unravel the surprising ways a powerful, actually a minority elite, managed to shape an entire region's identity, often, against the diverse interests of its own people. It's a story full of unexpected turns.
Exactly. And our journey today is about dissecting that central paradox. How geographic, economic, and social factors didn't just influence the South, they fundamentally, well, re-engineered its very identity, determined its whole trajectory.
Mm.
We'll try and reveal the surprising mechanisms through which a relatively small group of elites really pulled the strings. They pushed a vision for the South that, didn't necessarily serve everyone, but which almost everyone eventually rallied behind. It's kind of a masterclass in how power gets consolidated.
Okay, so if we're tracing the roots of this unique identity, we kind of have to start literally from the ground up, the land itself. And surprisingly, what truly ignited profound change in the South during this era wasn't like immediate expansion, but actually the depletion of its most vital resource, its arable land.
That's absolutely right. Overcultivation in the older Southeast, states like Virginia, the Carolinas, it wasn't just inconvenient. It was an economic and, frankly, environmental crisis that had been brewing for decades.
Right.
I mean, imagine farming the same land season after season without the kind of modern fertilization techniques we have. The soil it gives out. This wasn't some minor issue. It acted as this huge environmental pressure cooker that fundamentally spurred a massive demographic and economic shift for the whole region.
And the most visible and really kind of staggering consequence of that environmental pressure cooker you mentioned is this massive, almost involuntary westward migration of slaveholders.
Yeah.
I mean, picture this. Entire plantation operations, families, skilled overseers, livestock, and tragically, thousands upon thousands of enslaved people packed up, driven across vast distances. They were abandoning exhausted fields for new opportunity.
And this wasn't just, a simple move. It was an economic imperative, sort of a
Yeah.
strategic retreat and advance all rolled into one. They were heading to the richer, untouched soils west of the Appalachians,
Right.
lands stretching from Alabama to Mississippi, newly opened territories just ripe for exploitation. And this westward movement was absolutely crucial because it wasn't just about finding new dirt. It directly fueled the massive expansion of the plantation system,
Right.
transforming virgin forests into these vast cotton fields almost overnight, it seemed. And in doing so, it became the relentless engine for the continued and tragic growth of the institution of slavery itself. It tied the South's future even more tightly to human bondage and really shaped its demographics for generations.
So with all this westward expansion happening, you might think, okay, maybe a more diverse agricultural landscape would emerge. But it seems the South actually narrowed its focus quite dramatically.
It did.
If you had to pinpoint the single economic engine that truly defined this era, the one crop that became its absolute heart, what would it be? And why did it become so central?
Oh, without a doubt, cotton. Cotton became the undisputed king of the Southern economy. You had the invention of the cotton gin, which suddenly made short staple cotton profitable.
Right, the gin. Huge deal.
Huge. And suddenly, these vast fertile lands of the Deep South, combined with enslaved labor, created this explosion of production. And this deep reliance on cotton production and its export, not just to the North, but critically to Britain's booming textile mills, profoundly shaped Southern identity.
How so?
Well, it fostered a distinct regional identity, one that was just heavily tied to an agrarian, slave-based economic system, an identity that saw itself as, frankly, indispensable to global commerce.
Now, when many of us think of the Old South, we often picture, the sweeping plantations, the wealthy owners, maybe images from movies or books.
Sure, the Gone with the Wind image.
Exactly. But I want to challenge that common perception. What does this all mean for the reality of Southern society during this time? Did that image truly represent all Southerners? Or was there something much more nuanced going on beneath the surface?
Well, absolutely more nuanced. And that's a critical detail that's often well overlooked. Despite that pervasive image of grand plantations, the majority of white Southerners actually owned no enslaved persons at all.
Wow, the majority.
The majority. These individuals were primarily yeoman farmers. They worked their own plots of land, lived a very different life than the planter elite, often independent, fiercely proud, not necessarily wealthy.
That's a huge distinction. So, okay, what was the position of these yeoman farmers then? I mean, culturally, most of them probably bought into the idea of white supremacy, but did their economic or political interests always align with those powerful planters who dominated the economy?
Not always, no. And this is where the internal tensions and, the complexities really come into play. You see, while many yeoman farmers saw themselves as part of the broader white community, they occasionally challenged the goals of the planter elite.
Really? How?
Well, in fact, some, particularly those maybe on the western frontier where land was still being settled and the hierarchy was maybe less rigid, some even called for the gradual abolition of slavery.
From within the white population.
Yes, because they could see clearly how the system of enslaved labor, with its vast, efficient plantations, actually disadvantaged them economically. It made it harder for small farmers like them to compete and, thrive.
So we have these glimpses of dissent, even calls for abolition from within the white population, which, on the surface, seem like they could have really fractured Southern society.
You'd think so.
Yet, these challenges were largely unsuccessful.
Yeah.
Why? What was so powerful that it could suppress what sounds like a significant movement and allow this minority, the planters, to maintain control?
Well, their efforts to influence state legislatures were largely unsuccessful because of the sheer economic and political dominance of the cotton economy, an economy firmly controlled by the planter class.
Okay.
And this raises a truly vital question for our deep dive. How did the elite planters, who were, let's be clear, a minority of the white population, manage to unify and maintain such tight economic and political control over the much larger population of white Southerners who didn't even own enslaved people? That's the central puzzle, isn't it?
Indeed, that is the core question we need to unlock. If they were a minority, how did they pull it off? Let's dig into the practical, often pretty shrewd strategies these elite planters used to unify and exert both economic and political control over the broader white population. What was their playbook, so to speak?
They employed several key strategies, and they were definitely interwoven. The first was direct political influence.
Okay.
And we can trace a foundational element of this way back to the Three-Fifths Compromise, that constitutional agreement that, controversially, counted enslaved individuals as three-fifths of a person for determining a state's population for representation in Congress.
Right, inflating their representation.
Exactly. It effectively inflated the political power of states with large enslaved populations. It granted them a much larger voice in Congress and state legislatures than their free white population alone would have warranted. This was a foundational, structural advantage that allowed a relatively tiny group of elite slaveholders to wield disproportionate political power. They could shape laws to favor their interests.
So a built-in advantage right from the start, basically. Beyond that direct political leverage, what other, maybe more subtle methods did they use? How did they secure their position within the daily lives of other white Southerners?
The second major strategy was creating deep economic dependence.
How does that work?
Well, imagine you're a small yeoman farmer, maybe just scraping by. Your family's survival depends on the next harvest, and maybe a bad season hits.
Yeah.
A planter with their vast resources might be your only lifeline, offering a crucial loan to get you through a tough period, or maybe offering seasonal work that literally puts food on your table.
Okay, that's it.
And when your modest crops are finally ready, who owns the wagons? Who owns the warehouses, the connections to get them to market? Often, it was the planter class. This wasn't charity. It was a deliberate systemic strategy.
Right.
It created this deeply ingrained economic dependency where your very livelihood was tied to staying in their good graces and, by extension, supporting the system they controlled. It created, massive incentives for non-slaveholding whites not to mess with the system.
So we have the built-in political power and this powerful web of economic dependency tying people to the planter class. But what about the ideological glue? What really cemented this control, maybe even more profoundly, weaving through all these differences and binding Southern society together so strongly?
That brings us to the third and perhaps the most pervasive strategy: white supremacy as a unifying ideology.
Explain that.
Starting significantly in the 1830s, planters worked incredibly hard to bring together, to rally and unite the entire white population of the South, regardless of their economic standing, around the powerful unifying idea of white supremacy.
Hmm.
This ideology asserted the supposed superiority of the white race. It provided a common ground, a shared sense of identity, even if, as one source puts it, white people's economic or political interests differed according to class. It created this powerful bond that could mask other divisions, ensuring solidarity even when economic realities might have suggested otherwise.
It's clear that slavery wasn't just an economic practice. It became deeply embedded, didn't it? In the social, the political fabric, even the very identity of the South. But the intellectual and moral landscape around slavery was also changing, you mentioned. It sounds like there was a big shift from earlier American views, which often expressed, well, reservations.
Absolutely. A huge shift. In stark contrast to the founders' often, tortured moral reservations about slavery, a new, far more aggressive and unapologetic defense of it emerged during this period.
More aggressive how?
This wasn't just about economic necessity anymore. It was framed as a positive social good, a cornerstone of civilization itself. It marked a fundamental ideological hardening. No more apologies.
And a leading, very influential figure in pushing this new aggressive defense was John C. Calhoun, correct?
That's right. Calhoun, a prominent South Carolina statesman, famously argued that slavery wasn't just a necessary evil, as some earlier figures might have conceded, but actually a positive good.
A positive good.
Yes. He stated, and I'm quoting him directly here, "I hold that in the present state of civilization, where two races of different origin are brought together, the relation now existing is, instead of an evil, a positive good."
Wow.
And he didn't stop there. He further asserted that, no wealthy and civilized society has ever existed without one portion living on the labor of another. For Calhoun, the mastery of the white race over the black race was, quote, "the glue that holds the very core of the Southern society together."
So you're saying it's essential?
Essential. Proponents like him claimed slavery was essential to the Southern economy, yes, but also that it protected racial hierarchy and even, they argued, provided supposed civilization to enslaved people, framing it as absolutely central, indispensable, really, to the Southern way of life and its unique societal order.
That's a powerful and, frankly, disturbing assertion, a complete inversion of earlier moral qualms. But was Calhoun's strong, unified defense the only perspective among pro-slavery advocates? Or was there any diversity in these arguments, maybe even some surprising contradictions?
There absolutely was diversity and contradictions, too. Consider Zephaniah Kingsley, a Florida planter. He's a figure who truly embodies these complexities.
Okay.
While he undeniably profited from enslaved labor and defended it as economically necessary, his personal life tells a vastly different, almost you could say rebellious story.
How so?
Well, he famously freed and then married an African woman. He had children with her. And he even advocated for the rights of free people of color, which were astonishing stances for his time, especially when pro-slavery views were hardening elsewhere.
So he's defending slavery, but also...
Exactly. He wrote essays defending slavery from an economic standpoint, yet he argued for more flexible racial boundaries in society. It just demonstrates that even within the staunch defense of slavery, you could find these deeply contradictory, almost subversive personal philosophies and actions. His very existence complicates the narrative.
So we have these internal debates, these evolving justifications happening within the South. How do these connect to the larger external global forces at play, particularly around the institution of slavery itself?
The global movement toward abolition played a critical role. It really intensified the South's defense of slavery. Specifically, Britain's emancipation of all its slaves in 1834 sent, shockwaves through the American South.
Right, that must have been a huge moment.
Huge. This external pressure made Southern plantation owners incredibly twitchy, as one of our sources puts it, because it suddenly made their peculiar institutions seem isolated and vulnerable on the world stage.
So it backfired, in a way, made them dig in.
Precisely. This global context directly contributed to the consolidation of pro-slavery ideology and the intensified efforts to unify white society around it. It came out of a deep-seated fear that without slavery, their entire economic and social structure would just collapse. It pushed them further into their defensive, distinct identity.
Okay, let's bring it all back then to our overarching theme. So what does this all mean? How did all these factors, the geography, the rise of cotton, the complex social structures, these powerful ideologies, and even external global pressure, Mm. How do they ultimately coalesce into a truly distinctive, almost unshakable Southern identity?
Well, all of these elements fundamentally reinforced that the continued reliance on the production and export of traditional agricultural staples, primarily cotton, was the key contributor to this growth of a distinctive Southern regional identity.
Uh,
And this identity, as we've explored, became deeply, almost irrevocably intertwined with the institution of slavery and the social structures it fostered. It's really a key paradox for you to remember, even though a majority of white Southerners didn't own enslaved people.
right. That key point again.
The planter elite, through political maneuvering, economic leverage, and crucially, the unifying force of white supremacy, successfully argued that slavery wasn't just an economic system, it was the cornerstone of the Southern way of life. They reinforced its perceived centrality to the region's culture, economy, and its very existence.
And there you have it, a deep dive into Southern society in the early Republic. We've journeyed from, the geographic push westward and the explosive rise of King Cotton through the complex social dynamics of yeoman farmers versus elite planters, to the evolving, often aggressive justifications for slavery and the profound impact of global abolitionist pressure. It's really a testament to how deeply intertwined economic, social, and political forces can become.
Yeah, this deep dive really reveals an intricate, almost meticulously constructed web. You've got economic necessity, political power, and ideological reinforcement, all shaping the South from 1800 to 1848. Slavery wasn't just an economic system. It became, certainly in the eyes of its leaders, the perceived cornerstone of their entire societal and cultural identity. It unified groups despite their sometimes wildly differing individual interests and ensured the perpetuation of a system that defined the region for generations to come.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener. What stands out to you about how powerful groups can shape identity and belief, even when individual experiences within that group are so diverse? And maybe, how do economic needs and ideological narratives still intertwine in complex, sometimes unseen ways in the world we live in today? Something to think about long after our deep dive ends. Until next time.